Monday morning, it's probably a little bit enthusiastic, isn't it, to require people to participate in a webinar at 8 a.m. on Monday morning when some of you are in lockdown trying to manage all of the fun. Thank you, Amy. Yes, this is my home office, which was never meant to be starring on a Zoom screen or in a virtual courtroom, but has been for the last 18 months. And I do get some funny looks about the wallpaper. Some people ask me if it's a virtual Zoom wallpaper. I say, no, it's just the room that I built with a whole lot of birds. Luckily, they're behind me and I look out the window. I think if I was looking at birds all day, it might actually be a little bit much. Anyway, so thank you so much for getting up early and coming to join me as we talk through fixed pricing. I will just give it a few more minutes. And my printer's also printing my slides for me at snail's pace, because that's always fun. As I lean sideways to get the second half of my presentation ready to go. While we're waiting, I would love to know, I know John Chisholm won't have any questions for me, but if Amy and Sarah, I'd love to have some idea, I guess, of what you're doing in terms of the fixed pricing journey and what you're hoping to learn about this morning. And if you could pop that in the chat box for me, then I can do my very best to try and segue into those questions as we work through today. But otherwise, I'm going to share with you some of, I guess, the mistakes that I made as I enthusiastically leaped into the fixed pricing space a few years ago. And hopefully through sharing some of the mistakes that I made, I can firstly prevent you from making the same mistakes, but also give you some head start on some of the, I guess, the challenges, but also the opportunities that come from thinking about this differently. Good morning, Sheridan Emerson. Lovely to have you also from Sydney in the world of lockdown. So any of you juggling everything, this will be recorded. We will share the recording. Please don't worry if you miss things and all of those things. So for those of you that have joined, I've just asked the preliminary question. What is it that you're hoping to get out of today? What might be any of those burning questions? And if you could throw those into the chat box for me, that would be wonderful. Amy, thank you. So love to know from you what sort of area of law you're practicing in and what you've been dabbling with the fixed pricing in. It will just help me to tailor some of my information for you. And for the rest of you joining, as I said, if you have a chance, jump into the chat box and let me know what sort of fixed pricing journey you're on, where you're at in that adventure, how that's working for you. I'm going to get started. My 5 biggest learnings is what I thought I'd share today when it came to losing the timesheets. And ultimately, I hope that I can persuade you that tossing the timesheets, which really is a huge part of making a shift to value pricing, why that is such a good idea for so many different reasons in a legal business. For those of you that don't know me, I am Clarissa. I am up here in Brisbane and I am the head of Brisbane Family Law Centre, which is a law firm that does exactly what it says on the tin. We are a specialist family law practice and very much an out-of-court dispute resolution focused practice. And in my other life, I run a business called Happy Lawyer, Happy Life, working with lawyers all around the world, really trying to help them improve their businesses. And in doing so, in a perfect world, improve their happiness and wellness as well. Something that I'm very passionate about is ensuring that our legal careers have at the heart of them this idea that you will be a happy person, because there's so much more to life than the work that we've all chosen to do. So I get to do a whole lot of that fun work through my business, as I said, Happy Lawyer, Happy Life, and in particular through the membership, the club. And I can see a few of the wonderful club mates on the call. Good morning, Elspeth. Really great group of very entrepreneurial lawyers, particularly mainly women all around Australia, all sharing their ideas every day about, I guess, breakthroughs, different ways that they're approaching the legal businesses that they run. And it's quite a powerful thing to be a part of. And I learn every day from that wonderful group of people. So thank you so much, Amy, for sharing me a little bit more information there for employment law. So great. Yeah, and so the biggest battle is how to price and getting the team not to use the timesheet as a reference point. We're going to talk about that this morning. That old chestnut of, oh, look, it's about 4 hours, 4 times 400 or whatever the hourly rate might be, and away we go. Yeah, there are alternate ways of pricing. So anyway, we'll see how we go. So why would you toss the timesheets? I have run my firm since 2008. What does that make it? 13 years. And those that know me would know that I've never had a particularly traditional outlook when it comes to law firms and legal business, but I absolutely ran a time-based billing firm for the first half of that time. We always had an element of fixed pricing work done in my practice. And as a family lawyer, they were the easy things to fix price, particularly divorce applications. And I'm sure if there are any family lawyers on the call, you probably find that that's part of your practice that is and has always been a fixed pricing model. And the other thing that I had always done is under the family law scale in terms of costs, there was sort of an itemized component where it was words per minute as opposed to, number of words as opposed to time. So if you drafted an affidavit, there was a fee, and I can't remember what it was, but it was, so many dollars for so many words. And that's how work was charged. And that's how I had grown up in law. That was what my initial boss used. And that's what I adopted when I moved to the practice that I ran. So any letters that we wrote, any documents that we drafted, we had this sort of price per word policy. Some might say that that meant that you would write more words. That's never been my approach. I'm a less is more girl. So I was very efficient, and I found that that model worked really well for me, that it was a more beneficial way of capturing the value than the time that I might spend on things. And it also, from an early stage, encouraged our firm to think about, well, how can we develop precedents or documents or automations that enable us to, in essence, do this sort of thing more efficiently, noting that we're not charging by the time it's spent doing things. The ultimate decision to toss the timesheets came as a result of hanging out with some really smart people in law and following many of them on social media, one of whom is on this call. So one of the people that I've looked up to most in this space, John Chisholm, is watching right now, which is slightly terrifying. But between the knowledge that John was sharing through his social channels and the speaking that he was doing and the work that he was doing, and then a colleague of mine here in Brisbane, Matthew Burgess, who runs a very, very interesting and great law firm called View Legal, I was starting to see that these firms around me were just doing things differently. And Matthew particularly was incredibly generous with his time. He had left a large law firm, set up his firm, and there were no timesheets. And so I spent a fair bit of time with Matthew learning from him. What did he do? What didn't he do? How did it work for him? And he's an estate planning practice, so different to the type of work that I did. That led me on a bit of a hunt to the work of the Vera Sage Institute. So they're incredible. And I guess very much a world thought leader in this space around value pricing and different ways of pricing things and delivering services in the professional services space. So all of those things were floating around, and I had never liked timesheets. And I don't know how many of you on this call actually get any joy in timesheets, but I'm going to take a punt and say none of you. And they're this thing that just exists in law firms, and I questioned why. I was useless at filling them in. I was never particularly good, and that's never great as a business owner. I'm sure we lost, in inverted commas, lots of time because I just was, it just never inspired me. And it's not the sort of work that I enjoyed doing, in the sense of I'm a family lawyer. My strengths are with people, and I love talking to people, and I love talking to people about things that often have nothing to do with their legal case. And I found this constant sort of ethical quandary of, I'm talking to this person about life, and technically I should be billing them because that's how the system works, but I just always felt uncomfortable about that. So there were a couple of drivers for me around why I wanted to shift that. One of the biggest drivers was wellness. I didn't see a lot of happiness attached to this idea that time and money are somehow connected. So I was really hunting for alternate ways of doing things. So in my little firm, we experimented initially. We sort of dabbled. We tried a bit of this, we tried a bit of that. That was a bit of a disaster. And then one day I came to a team meeting and I said, look, guys, I've been talking about this fixed pricing stuff for a while. I just want to go all in on it. And that means that as of next week, everything in this office is going to be done on a fixed pricing timescale, that's the wrong language, isn't it? Fixed pricing scale, whatever that means for this particular firm at the time and the type of work we were doing. We had some clients that were still on cost agreements that didn't want to make the shift. So we had to sort of run this hybrid model for a little period of time. But I basically just said, from Monday, everything's fixed pricing. And so here was the first mistake. I, being Clarissa, I'm a let's just do it and deal with the consequences later, girl. And most of the time that works super well for me, because the advantage of that approach, particularly in business, is you just get on with it. The disadvantage of that approach in business is that you get on with it and you learn as you go. And so you have to be comfortable with the idea that you actually don't know and you're going to make mistakes along the way. And so, as I said to everyone, as of Monday, we're now a fixed pricing law firm, and I kept timesheets. And so we had a situation where we had team members still recording time, me still doing it poorly, but we were quoting people fixed prices for the different things that we were doing. And the significant challenge that comes from that way of doing things is that you're creating a system where people can compare old and new. And it was really brought home to me one day when a solicitor in my firm had done a small piece of work, thankfully. It was quoted from memory at about $1,100 and something. And she did said piece of work, and she issued a bill to the client for $500 and something. I went to her and said, what's this? We've still got $500 and something in trust. And she said, oh yeah, look, I finished it. And I just did it so quickly. I just didn't think there was a need to charge the client the $1,000 and something that they'd agreed to pay for that piece of work. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And really immediately brought home for me the significant problem with still allowing the timesheet to exist as a reference point. So one of the first things that I will encourage you to really give some thought to is literally pulling time out of your business in its entirety. Do not keep timesheets if you are trying to make this shift, because all that will happen is constantly you will have this data reference point. And when you think about it, timesheets are not actually a record of anything useful whatsoever, other than the inputs that went into the activities for the day. And they're not a measure of how effective you were with the work that you did, how wonderful the solutions were that you generated for your clients, whether those solutions were particularly helpful, unique, or any of those things, whether they were delivered in a super efficient way. Because time, when you really think about it, if we're measuring the inputs, one of the underlying challenges of the timesheet model is it does actually reward inefficiency. Those that take longer technically can charge more. Now, I know most of us are busy enough where that's not necessarily a problem, but at its core, that's the overarching problem with timesheets. They work super well for professionals. They're not very client-centric. And something that I'm really interested in at the moment is building a client-centric business, really thinking about this from the customer perspective. And if you put yourself in the shoes of any of our customers, if you yourself have ever done business with a professional services firm that use time-based billing, you would know the challenges that arise when someone says, look, Clarissa, it might cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. I, of course, wish for it to cost $5,000. The professional involved, of course, is comfortable with the idea that it may cost $10,000. And then, of course, when it becomes $12,000, everyone ends up in a pickle. And this model, where we're just measuring things as we go, sadly tends to lead to all sorts of challenges, particularly around bill shock, one of the biggest complaints in the areas that we all practice in. So my tip number one, if you're interested in making a shift to fixed and value pricing, we're going to talk about the differences when I say fixed versus value in a minute, is that you remove the capacity for you or anyone in your organization to write down in 6-minute increments whatever it is that they've been doing. Now, the other problem when you do that, though, of course, is law firms and all of the KPIs within law firms tend to be built around the timesheet. So if I am a senior person in an organization and I'm going to pitch for my pay rise, more often than not, it's somehow attached to the time and the numbers that I have generated across a year. And so when you toss timesheets from a legal business, what you're also tossing is a metric that many people get incredible comfort from. How many hours did people bill? How do we set our budget for the year ahead? Well, we've got 10 fee earners and we expect that they each day would bill 6.5 hours. So as long as we go 10 by 6.5 by so many dollars, we've got a sense of how much money we anticipate we'll make this year. And the minute you pull all of those metrics out of a law firm, you've suddenly created something very, very different, which for many lawyers is terrifying because we love the predictable. We love things to be as they were. We, by and large, don't cope well with change. So when you pull the time metric, you now have the opportunity, and that's what I encourage you to think about this as, to rethink how are we going to measure success in this legal business? Because it's no longer going to be about the inputs on a timesheet. And instead, what I'm going to encourage you to think about is how you might measure the outputs, how you might measure the value that you're bringing as a team to the customers that you're serving, and importantly, the value that you're bringing internally in terms of your culture particularly. So number two, mistake number two that I made. So not only did I say, guys, as at Monday, we are now fully fixed at value pricing, I had pretty much no data upon which to base any of my decision making on, because that's me to a T. I am the queen of intuition. I'm like, oh, let's just try that and see what happens. Let's just try that and see what happens. So that's not how I now teach fixed and value pricing to anyone that participates in any of my programs. And I encourage you to go on a significant data adventure, either before or during your move into fixed and value pricing. One of the pieces of data that I find the most helpful, and particularly in small firms, that I really encourage you to ensure that you know right down to the dollar, is a number that I call your magic number. So I know there are some students of Clarissa's School of Business and Fixed Pricing on this call, and they've heard me harp on all the time about the magic number, and why I didn't work this out earlier in my business journey, I will never understand. So many of you probably know this well, but one of the simple numbers that makes a massive difference for me in terms of my budgeting and my business planning is to know to the dollar, how much does it cost to run my legal business? So for me, that is a spreadsheet that I have where I'm able to put in across a 6-month period all of the costs associated with running my business. And so many of you would do this, I'm sure, from a budgeting perspective. I didn't. I ran my firm, it sort of grew, it sort of had all these people and things were happening and we had a sense of what was going on, but never was I particularly good at sitting down and going, how much does it actually cost? Right down to the hour to run this legal business. And now I know that with absolute precision. And having that absolute transparency over literally how much does it cost has made a massive difference for me with the implementation of fixed pricing. It also enables you to really give some thought to some different ways of pricing to ensure that your business is still viable, because this is something that we really need to think about in business. Obviously, it's all well and good having a fun, flashy business, but if at the end of the day it's not able to pay its way, then we've got a whole lot of challenges that ultimately create incredible stress in business. So for me, I now run my business to the magic number. So I share my magic number with my team. I don't share necessarily the data that goes into building the magic number, but I absolutely share the number. And we don't have individual targets within our firm. There are 4.1 solicitors at BFLC. There's a web designer, there's a graphic designer, there's a bunch of legal assistants. We have a pretty contemporary team. All of those people create things that create revenue. So it's not a situation where I've got, the lawyers doing all of the, in inverted commas, billable work and the others doing the supporting roles. We have a model of productized services. So we have the capacity for all of my team members to be leveraging their skills to create revenue for our business. So I share with everyone the magic number. It forms the basis of what we use, which is a weekly billing target. And again, one of my learnings and something that has worked really well for me is to shift billing targets and make them weekly. So we chase numbers weekly. And the advantage of doing that in a firm like mine, the size that it is it just keeps everything tracking forward. And if there's a challenge, we can solve it early before the challenge is at the end of the month and we realize, oh God, the cash flow for that first 3 weeks was a nightmare. And we've got all of these sort of ups and downs in business. I like a really simple ship. Spent Saturday doing a mastermind with 10 lawyers and spent the whole day talking about different types of boats. So when you think about your business, think about boats. This is the analogies that I'm running with at the moment. I like a really simple boat. Mine is a nice yacht, but a very simple yacht that doesn't do the Sydney to Hobart race. It just puts around in the Sydney harbour, being very comfortable, providing me with a nice lifestyle, but I don't need too much excitement. I'm very happy to live my excitement outside of my business, and I just want it to be a nice, stable ship. And what enables me to do that these days is this real clarity over how much money do we need, and tracking it and making it a team goal. So I don't care who within the team has contributed to that goal each week. We don't even track who within the team has contributed because we have this team culture where everyone is in and pitching in as a result. In terms of the data, again, some of the other numbers that I didn't have, that I do have now, that make a massive difference to my ability to make decisions, is average file revenue. So something that we ended up doing early in the shift to fixed and value pricing, I had one of my client solicitors create this mass Excel spreadsheet where he went back through about 6 years of business data, and he went right through all of our files and he put them into categories, so family law firm. So it was parenting matter, mediation property, mediation parenting, litigation this, arbitration that, like all of the different types of work, consent orders easy, consent orders complex client. And so all of a sudden we were able to stand back and go, this is interesting. Look at all of these numbers. Now, admittedly, these were time-based billing numbers, but it was just a way of looking at it and going, broadly speaking, the average file revenue for all matters that have involved parenting litigation over the past 6 years have looked like this, and et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. And it just gave me, again, some data to go, this is an interesting place to think. Didn't mean that we suddenly went, all right, from here on in, every parenting matter that involves litigation will always be this price. It just was more information that helped me to ultimately make decisions around pricing. In doing that activity, we also started to analyze and work out which ones are the more profitable files. And something I came to learn is the files that had these often larger prices that had been on in our office for many years, that often involved complex litigation, were by no means profitable. Whereas files that were consent orders that might be done in a couple of weeks or a couple of months were very, very profitable. So it was interesting in terms of then thinking about, well, what type of work do I want in this business and how do I want to chase it down? A metric that's really important to me, most enjoyable file. So again, I don't get great joy out of litigation. I do a lot of it as an independent children's lawyer, and I find it very interesting and valuable, but it isn't joyful. And joyful is something that matters to me. So again, we were going through and going, this is interesting. Like, where are these sorts of moments of joy? I know that sounds crazy in divorce law, but they exist. And what types of clients and what types of matters, and how can we attract more of those types of things? And interestingly, a lot of that connected into the profitable files. How many new files, therefore, do we need each year, and how many have we been opening over the past however many years? So I've now got about 13 years of file data, business data that I control through for these sorts of things. It's very interesting. When we looked at it, went back over time, how many new files were we opening? So for me, I wasn't really looking at people that had sort of asked questions in the law firm and may never have engaged. I was genuinely saying, how many new files have we by and large had each year? And it gave me, again, another metric that helped me to work out, well, pricing, how can this work? What's the average file length in this organization? And as a result of all of things, what would be a magic price? And so a concept around that for me, and a number that I'm interested in always having a think about, is if we know that it costs so much to run this business, and within that, can I say, I include a salary, I include a savings account, I include every possible thing that I might need to make my business work. So if we know how much it costs, we know that over the 13 years we've been in practice, by and large, we always open a certain number of files. So let's imagine that that remains consistent. What would be the magic price if we charged every single client the exact same price? Hypothetically, what is the magic price that enables me to run the business? Now, again, it doesn't mean that I charge everyone that price, but it was just a really helpful tool. And when it came to productizing, it enabled us to go, well, this is interesting. If we had a product where we always charged this price, it would, in essence, create the business. It would fund the business, and we would never have to do anything else. What if we had a product that we doubled the price on, but we were able to generate value that was double the other price that we were thinking about? So it just enables you to really shift your thinking the more you've got in terms of this data. So I hope that's not too overwhelming. There's a whole lot of information about some of the data mining that I did. Now, admittedly, I didn't do this when I made that decision that Friday afternoon and said, as from Monday, we're starting from scratch, let's go fixed pricing. So for the first probably 6 months, it was a lot of, oh, look, the old way it was so much, so let's just charge this. And I know that was a question of someone, how do we get rid of the timesheets as a reference point? Ultimately, there were a series of things that got rid of it for me. One was getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. So Matthew Burgess certainly taught me that an option with pricing is to have a bit of a pricing committee where you're not all attached emotionally to the people that you're helping. So I might meet the client, but then I go to some of the other members of my organization and say, this is the task, these are the dynamics, this is the complexity of the human beings involved, this is the expected time frame. I'm thinking this as a price. And the job of the pricing committee is to challenge me, to in essence be saying, well, why that? Why not more? Is that appropriate? And trying to really get people to think, because again, my observations for a lot of us, and particularly for women in small firms, is more often than not the prices that we suggest are down rather than up. There's very few people, in fact, I don't think I've met any in my communities where people are overcharging. Often it's the other. And so it's just really thinking about, okay, why this price, particularly when you are committing to that's the price and here are the tasks, and you don't have that flexibility around, oh, sorry, it turns out I was wrong, I'll just change that price. No, so we really have to commit. So pricing committees and getting input from others in your organization is really powerful. If there are any questions about that little novel of information, please throw them in the chat box. Otherwise, we're going to move to scoping, because here was the third mistake that I made. So scoping, the best story I can tell you, I think, that illustrates the power of scoping in law has nothing to do with law and everything to do with my renovation of our house here. Some years ago, my husband helpfully decided that the perfect time to embark upon a renovation of our home was when I was about 3 months, 4 months, 5 months pregnant. It was awesome. And of course, like all renovations, there was a budget, and then there was the outcome, which was really different to the budget. But we had a great builder, and he came to us when we were first obviously getting quotes with a fixed price quote. And he took many weeks to prepare this quote. In fact, I was getting quite frustrated with him in terms of how long it was taking for him to prepare us this quote. But when it came, it was like a small novel, because it was a fixed price building quote. And it went through in incredible detail for the steps that would be required, the things that were included, so that it was all listed through. Importantly, that scope, or that fixed price scope for that building project, formed obviously the basis for the renovation that came along, and they started digging under our house, and we live in a flood zone, so it's a perfect place to live. And of course, as they dug, they discovered that the soil was less than it should have been, and so all of those footings that they'd estimated for or put into the scope, I can't remember the detail now, but let's imagine there were 12, we needed 20. And so we issued a variation from our builder that said, hi, you can see from the original contract that we'd quoted you for 12, you actually need 20. So here is the variation up to accommodate the fact that you need 20 footings. Now, I guess we could have pulled the plug at that point in time and said, no, we're not comfortable with 20 footings, we only want 12. Small problem with a build, I imagine, if you don't have enough footings. So of course we say, fine, variation up, carry on building. And then as the build comes on, there are other things, like mainly me saying, I'd like, oh, it turns out I'd like some skylights because that would be nice. So it turns out I'd like this because that would be nice. But there were also things where it was, oh, it turns out we don't need that particular thing. And there was, for example, a big screen that was going to be put on, and I looked at it and thought, I don't want that. That's going to affect my light. We don't need that. Variation down. Okay, we don't need those bits of wood, whatever it was. Great building language going on here. So they come out, variation down. So it's like this base contract, and then it was up and down and up and down, and there were more ups than downs, let me assure you. However, I was really comfortable with that, because it was really well explained from the outset what we were paying for. And it was really well explained every time I went and said, hey, I wouldn't mind changing that. Okay, we can do that for you. Pause. We're going to set out what it's going to cost. We're going to set out what that's going to look like, and then you have a choice. Yes, you can. No, you can't. That's the model that I've adopted in the BFLC world of family law scoping. So we use the same model where we try and build out the most detailed scope we possibly can from the outset. And I'll show you one in a minute in terms of the type of scopes that we're doing. Again, a mistake I made is I sort of got burnt early on, because I was doing scopes and they'd be one page and they'd say, we will write to your former spouse, we'll do disclosure. If that doesn't resolve things after one sort of proposal, then we'll go to mediation. If that doesn't resolve things, then we'll go to court, and just be like this one sort of bullet point summary of the broad steps. silly, Clarissa. Nowhere in it was and it will require 12 footings, but if it requires 20, that will be a different thing. And if it's this, then that, whatever. I was too broad and not detailed enough. And so we did that initially, and it was things that were blowing out. Or I got caught one day, we'd done this actually really great piece of work for someone. It was a Hague Convention matter in terms of parenting cases. My solicitor that had done the work on it had drafted material and filed it, and it was so well drafted that it resulted in the case actually being discontinued on behalf of the government department here in Queensland that were running the case on behalf of the husband. And again, the mistake that I made was our scope was prepare and attend at trial for your Hague Convention matter. Good work, Clarissa. So we prepared, but we obviously didn't have to attend because the thing was resolved. And there was no breakdown in how I'd structured the fee proposal for which part of what we were doing that related to the work that had been done. Now, arguably, some would say to me, but that's the perfect outcome. You finished the case. So you could have charged the whole of the fee. And look, I perhaps could have, but there was no way that client was going to settle for that sort of concept. So that would have just resulted in a whole lot of fee complaints. And so we were left in this really tricky space of not being able to work out, well, how do we charge for the work that's been done on that? Because again, it's not a time thing. So how many hours that went into that? It's sort of like we're at a place, and I didn't have a marker for where that place was. So from that mistake, we now have billing timeframes that are very much attached, like the builder does, to stages in the build. So we've reached this stage, this has occurred, that is a billing timeframe. Now, it's not necessarily to say that all of that money relates solely to that thing, but it helps me with cash flow, and it helps when things start going out of scope, because you're able to say, well, this was the last billing timeframe. What's the shift? Where are we at? How does this work? Rather than everything being captured in one. So more detail, the better in your scopes, and the further down the path you can go, the better in my experience. Choosing your own adventure scopes are really powerful again in family law. If you want to go down this path, then this, then this, then this, or maybe it'll look like this, and then we'll be able to skip to step 10 because we've settled the disagreement here, and you don't need all of these things in the middle. Really laying out for people the different ways that they can take things and the costs involved, I find is really powerful in their decision making. That seemed like a really nice idea, but now I've looked at the price of that. It's actually not what I want to do. I would prefer to stick over here and do whatever this is over here. Scoping, and rescoping and rescoping and rescoping. So one of, again, the learnings in our office, things get hectic, something happens, someone brings up, okay, quick, we've got to deal with that. And you forget to go, hang on a second, this thing was never part of that original build contract. This unexpected event that's occurred wasn't part of our original scope. And you have to be incredibly disciplined to pause and say, absolutely, we can help you by installing those skylights, but we're going to find out how much they're going to cost first, and you're going to approve it before we do it. And even if that's on the fly, because sometimes in law things are just happening fast, you need to get on the phone and say, hi, Bob, this is happening. I want to talk to you about how and why this is a change from what we discussed previously. And then I am going to send you, even if it's a one-line email, Bob, just confirming with our discussion today, and the new fee that I'll get out to you in the next 24 hours is going to look like this. Can you confirm for me that that sounds okay? You know, really, really important to have this transparent communication around money with people. It will save you so many arguments down the track. Something else that I love to think about with scopes, and John Chisholm was wisely talking to me about this the other day, is having different scenarios. So having choice for people, having options in terms of how they might work with you. So a common way of thinking about that is to have a gold, silver, and bronze model. And when I say gold, I probably mean platinum. What does Louis Vuitton service look like for this particular person with this particular issue, versus how can we still assist them, but more with a silver level? And what would it look like if it was bronze? And in a perfect world with fixed and value pricing, if you can create scenarios for people where they have choice, where you're able to say, here's the Louis Vuitton option, where it's all the bells and whistles and everything we can do. And here's the mid-range option. And here's the stripped out, bit more you than us type option. And again, for different people, these things are really important. And something that we've found is when we offer those sorts of options, often people are picking the top end, Often, sometimes I'll start with I'll do a bit more myself, and then they might move into a place where we're doing a bit more. So really different customers and clients out there, and offering choice is really powerful. Lets people choose, empowers them. I think leads to much better customer and client relationships. And my final bullet point there I mentioned a minute ago, when it gets out of scope, please, please, please have a practice and a process of stopping it before it goes too far. And that is absolutely the mistakes that were being made in my office early on, particularly by solicitors that were newer and that were less comfortable about picking up the phone and talking to people about money. Fees. Most of us didn't come into law to charge people lots of money to do things. Most of us came into law because we genuinely enjoy helping people and solving complex problems. And so having to have conversations about very large amounts of money just gets sticky. And you can sometimes think, oh, well, I'll just refer it off to the accounts team at my firm. It's never going to have the same impact. So really trying to get comfortable with this idea of just having conversations with people about how much things are going to cost and giving them choice in that. Giving them choice to say yes, no, 3 bags full. What's the consequence if I don't? What's the consequence if I do? Are there any other options? How else might this work? It leads to much stronger and better customer relationships in my experience. Again, please do throw any questions as I'm talking at you. I'm trying to talk as much as I can in the space of an hour to give you as much information as I can. Number 4, learning one price doesn't fit all. So again, early mistake of Clarissa. I thought once we had all this data and we'd sort of worked it out, it was really easy. We just created a menu and people would come in and it would just be like going out to dinner where they just go, I'll have that entree and I'll have that main and I'll finish it off with this dessert. And I don't have to ever think again about pricing because I've nailed it. And we did that and it was a disaster. So don't do that. No. You can absolutely do a level of menu pricing. And in some spaces, I think that works really well. But the power in this space comes from this idea of pricing the value that you are delivering. And that is such a wonderful, simple thing to say. And it's such a complex and difficult thing to do. So when it comes to pricing, overarching learning from me is one price doesn't fit all. So what on earth do you then do? How on earth do you set the price? Where on earth do you begin? Well, I think John would have much better answers to that question than I would actually, but these are some of the things that have helped us, and we still are leveraging and playing with pricing every single day in my firm. So we price the client. What do I mean by that? So there are a couple of family lawyers on this call. Some family law clients are super easy, wonderfully efficient, really calm, great to work with, don't require a huge amount of your time. And then there's the other end of that spectrum, people that not any of those things and require a very different level of service, make things more difficult. They will end up with a different price in my firm than the people that are at the other end of that experience. Pricing the team, who's doing the work in your firm and what does that mean and what will that mean to your price? The pace, how quickly does someone need something done? Is this something where the whole office has to be sort of disrupted because of urgency? Is this something where we can just chug along and do it at a sensible pace? Those things affect price for me. And what is the actual piece of work? What is actually involved here? How complicated is it? And in family law, who's acting for the other person? It will have absolutely an impact on what I'm doing and how I may price. So all of those things almost get tossed into a melting pot as I'm pondering and thinking, what is it for pricing? I mentioned earlier having a magic price number. This is really interesting. Again, we don't use it as the base all the time, but it was a really helpful tool for me as we were starting to think about some of the products that we've developed. But it does interestingly help me with pricing as well. Taking the average number of files you've opened per year over the last 3 years, your magic number, so how much it costs to run your firm across a year, to work out an ideal price. And there is, was it Sarah? Sarah was in the States. No, it was Amy, wasn't it? That's in employment law. Amy, something that I think employment law services really lead themselves to, particularly if you're working for employers, is the option for some form of a retainer or productized service model. So where we can say, look, across a 12-month period, we could charge this monthly amount which would deliver this level of service, or we could charge this monthly amount that would deliver this level of service, or we could charge this monthly amount that would deliver this level of service. And really thinking about things from that more retainer model, I think in practice areas where you have clients that are not divorce clients, where usually it's we deal with them through the tragedy and hopefully we don't have to see them in a legal capacity ever again. But in other spaces of law where you are genuinely helping people over and over again with whatever it is that's going on in their lives or their businesses, I think you have incredible opportunity from a pricing perspective to really give some thought to structuring service offerings differently. Pricing is so challenging that I think sadly there is an element at times when you're starting out of the vibe. The vibe might be the old way it used to be pretty much this, so let's start there and see what happens. And I don't think that's a bad way to start. And then what should happen is as you start to do more and more value fixed pricing work and you realize that time is no longer your friend, efficiency is your friend, even if you're going the old way it was this, but then still focusing your culture onto efficiency, then I think you'll start to be able to move into a space where you can start to think about pricing differently. The other interesting thing that we often do is say, well, what if we wanted to only charge $1,500 for this thing, where by and large it usually would cost $5,500? Let's imagine that we wanted to build a product or deliver this service in such a way that the fee charged was $1,500, but we wanted to obviously use, for example, technology or systems to completely take out the front end work of humans so we could deliver the same profit margin value back to the organization. And that has helped us with pricing as well, to just completely shift how we're thinking about what we're delivering. So I don't know whether any of that actually answers the multi-million-dollar question of how do you price, but it's a whole lot of things. You've got to think about the type of work you're doing. You've got to think about the type of client you're working with. Think about the complexity. Think about the timeframes involved. Then you've got to think about how much does it cost to run my organization. Then you've got to think also about whether you're going to offer layers of service. So are you going to deliver a choice model of, say, gold, silver, bronze? And if you can, it's incredibly powerful. And in all of that, you might use a magic price as a bit of a reference. If every file that we ever did was priced always at this point, we know that we would make that work. So is that a way that we can deliver our services? There is a whole lot here to play with. And I think, again, for me, what worked was just having a go and learning. And sometimes that worked really well and it was great. And we were like, okay, that works for us. And sometimes it worked really poorly. And so we learned from that experience that, okay, when it doesn't work, don't do that again. Constantly coming back and reviewing, constantly sharing information internally, constantly saying, hey, I tried this and that worked really well. And I did that last week and that didn't. So please don't do that again. Number 5 in Clarissa's learnings of mistakes that have led to the opportunities. If you are going to make a shift to fixed and value pricing, it is a whole of business shift. So as I said early on today, you don't realize how much the timesheet and the time metric are the basis of everything in a law firm until you don't have it anymore. And it's amazing how uncomfortable it can make some people. Here are, however, the pros that I have experienced. I have no debtors in my business. I have absolutely 0 debtors on a debtor sheet. I am not owed money by any of my clients. And from a small business perspective, that is so joyful. I was with some colleagues out to dinner last weekend, beautiful friends of mine that are wonderful family lawyers that I have yet to persuade should move their businesses to a fixed and pricing model despite trying very hard. And one of them was talking to me about the fact that at the end of every month, he's sending out these cost disclosure notices to his clients where he's saying, hi, you have a cost agreement with me. We did an estimate to begin with of X, just to confirm that you're still within that estimate, or B, looks like you're going to be over it, or C, whatever it might be. And we were also talking about bill shock. We were talking about all of these things. And I looked at him and I said, you know, you could get rid of those letters if you just moved to fixed and value pricing. Think of the time that you would save. It would just be a game changer. And he sort of looked at me oddly, but I think I'm getting closer. It is so wonderful to not be having fee arguments when your work's done or halfway through. It is so wonderful to have certainty from the outset. And if someone is uncomfortable with the fee, to have that conversation before you've begun. And then to see, like, is there a way that we can help them in a way that they're comfortable with, in a budget that works for them, and be clear about that from the outset. And sometimes there is a way and sometimes there isn't, and that's okay too. But having that conversation up front, again, from a business owner perspective, is a game changer. One of the other things that I love about this fixed and value pricing model that we've implemented, and really detailed scopes and mapping out projects, I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute, is it creates cash flow predictability in my firm. So we're able to literally drop a project, a new client file and the steps involved in their matter into, in essence, a calendar type system where it's project management, where you can say, okay, all things going as we anticipate, these are the billing timeframes for this file. This is what we can anticipate. You can do that for all of your work, and you can stand back and go, gosh, look at the month of June. That's the problem. Or, wow, look at the month of July. We've got way too much work going on in there. Quick, what can we bring forward? What can we move here? Will we need more resourcing at this period of time? If we want to take on this client, how's that going to look? So you can really start to cash flow predict your firm and project predict your firm, which I think is really powerful. And it was never how I had observed law firms I'd ever worked in to work. It was a case of, oh, we just sort of do stuff and we just keep doing stuff and it works. You know, I run very much a project management system. What's the project? What are the steps? Who's doing what? Enables a much more team-focused culture. Efficiency is incredibly rewarded in a fixed and pricing model. So once you know that, for example, this piece of work is going to cost $10,000 for the client, it becomes a real shift in mindset from a solicitor and from those working on the file to go, okay, well, what are the pieces that we must do? And what are the things that just happened in this office and no one actually ever understood why? So I spent the last few years, having watched the Marie Kondo series on Netflix and reading her book, what I call Marie Kondoing my way through my law firm. And look, again, I'm a pretty, I guess, forward-thinking law firm, but we still had a whole lot of practices that had sort of happened when I started the firm, and they'd stayed in place because they did. And no one ever really questioned why. And so I went on this really purposeful 12 months of going, why do we do this? Is it still useful to us? If so, thank you, please stay. If not, as Mari would say, thanks very much and head off into the world and I don't need you in my life anymore, in a good way. And so I Marie Kondoed our way through our letters, through our processes, through our gathering of information, through the way we communicated with people, and just really started to go, gosh, you know, there are all these things that we probably don't need. Get rid of them. And there are things that could be done better, things where we can up our service, up our touch points, really thinking about how we're delivering what we're doing. In this day and age, we have incredible technology tools that can make your work so much more efficient. And when you are in a space where the price is not changing, you are encouraged to look for tools that are going to, again, make that work more efficient for you. All of that has led to, in my business, a culture of innovation, collaboration, and efficiency. We do run a beautifully tight ship. We have a lovely collaborative team, and we are a very innovative organisation. Every single one of the people in my organisation are constantly there saying, hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? That is really powerful, something I'm incredibly proud of, and I know is heavily linked again to this idea that we don't have timesheets sitting underneath everything. We have a culture where it's like, I'm going to have a go at this and see what happens and see if I can create something different. That then leads to this, which is really important for me. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm like sailing around the world and everything's amazing. I'm a family lawyer. Good heavens, that's not possible. And business is tricky, and legal business is tricky. But there are things that are well within our control. And when you are running a business, or as I like to call it at the moment, driving your boat, the captain of your ship, these are the sorts of things that are wholly within your control. And I encourage you to play with them and really give some thought to how they could work for you, because they will ultimately have a significant impact on your mental health and therefore the people working with you as well. And that stuff really does matter, but that's a lecture for another day. So I want to show you an example of how a fixed fee proposal would look for the customers in our firm. They are all different. So there is no one thing that everyone gets. Everything is customized. And so one of the things, or one of the learnings, I guess, in all of that is you spend a lot of time up front in a matter, building out this scope and building out the project plan, which sometimes is frustrating. Sometimes I do just say to myself, God, it'd be easier if I just sent a cost agreement saying it'll cost about this much at so many hours and put the money in trust and I'll just get on with it. You know, we would probably spend an hour and a half plus planning out the pieces of the project. But the advantage of me doing this at the front end is A, the work is really clear, B, the client's really clear about what we're doing, and C, it becomes almost like a task list that I can then delegate within my team so that other people can assist, and I don't then spend a lot of time doing that. It's all there, as you'll see in about 20 PowerPoints. So we shifted, and part of that Marie Kondo thing that I did a few years ago was to shift all of our communications where possible from Times New Roman black and white font to colourful PowerPoints. So the majority of the communications with our clients about anything that requires, you know, some real, here we are, comes in colourful PowerPoints. And this is how it looks. So this is a fee proposal for an imaginary client called Sarah. And this is literally how she would receive it. So it starts with just a kind letter. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for the opportunity to set our proposal for the next stages of your legal matter and the expected fees, blah, 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 blah. So immediately you can see the style of language and the style, I guess, that I'm using, particularly just by using PowerPoint and using colour, heaven forbid, which is not very familiar often in legal firms. This idea came from two sources for me. I'm always very honest about the fact that most of my ideas never actually just drop from me. They're constantly on the search for good ideas from other people. And usually those good ideas come from people who are not lawyers. There are two professionals in my life that communicate through PowerPoint, and it changed my life. One is my accounting firm that I do business with up here in Brisbane. They're wonderful. And they were the first ones that sent me a proposal like this. And it just, as a client, it was quite a large amount of money, but I was really comfortable paying the money because I was like, this is so schmick. The way it's set up, it made it really easy for me to understand what I was paying them for. And this was the page I stole from them. They had this in their document that came to me. So I'd met with Brad, who's my accountant, but there were all these other people that were emailing me that I'd never met and I didn't need to meet. But gee, it was nice to be able to go, oh, that's so-and-so. Oh, right, that's what they look like. And that's their name and that's their title and that's where they fit in the business. So we've incorporated that concept for both the legal team and the support team in our business. So all of the people in my business are featured in every fixed fee proposal that goes out. And again, it changes how people communicate with us. So they know the face of the human that's at the end of the phone or the email that they might be receiving. Then some information about what we're committing to do. So a little bit about the values of our organisation. And again, the IP in my business, when it comes to family law, is largely built around three core pathways that I have observed that people we help take. So all of what we do with people is shaped around these three core pathways, and we have built our processes, our systems, and our tools around this idea that there are three core ways that people usually are assisted by us. And they look like this. The first is what we call a bit of a DIY option, where the client does the majority of the work and they're able to use tools or products that we've built in our business to complement that work. So I've written a book about divorce. I have a course that they can do, an online course that they can do about divorce that leads to a technology tool that generates the settlement documents that they will need. So that is a very low touch point service in terms of our business, but once built, we're able to sell it at very high volume. The second way is through a process called collaborative practice, which is a style of negotiation and settlement. And the third way, and the best name I could come up with, is what we call classic family law, which is pretty much everything else. And it's pretty much what most of the family lawyers on this call would be very, very comfortable in terms of what they do. And then you can see that within classic family law, as I've called it, we've broken it down into a series of steps that, again, our whole IP is built to. So setting a plan, gathering data, building a proposal. If the proposal doesn't resolve it, then moving to a place where people are trying to resolve their matter through negotiation, mediation, arbitration, or litigation. And everyone's a winner in family law. Whichever way you go, you all end up with some settlement documents. So it doesn't matter which pathway you go down, the prize is the same at the end. And having these sorts of visual tools were found really, really powerful for people when they're coming in, they're in the midst of a separation, they don't know what's going on. How do we space it out? And so whichever path you're going down, you're going to end up in the same place. The question is the dance you take as you go. So this client was being given a pathway that was associated with that third example that I spoke to you about. Classic family law. So you can see on this slide, we've given them a summary of that and the very broad steps. And then the balance of this fee proposal is setting out how that might work. some information about how much does it all cost. So we're giving, in this example, one sort of key pathway, but of course it's family law. So we're saying, guess what, if things change, we'll let you know. And these are the sorts of things that sometimes can change, and the discussion here about going to court. I don't do, as I said, a lot of litigation in a private capacity for people. And so it's not usually a conversation that's being had with our clients early on, but for some people it becomes the only way forward. So it's important, we think, to always be saying this may be a thing that becomes an issue. And if it does, we'll talk to you obviously about the fees then, but please know now, it's not a cheap thing to be doing. So for this particular client, Sarah, we have included the following pathway and setting out her plan here. So part one of the work that we're going to be doing for Sarah involves us gathering information. We're using a tool that some of the family lawyers might know called Adue, which is changing my life. And it's in essence a financial disclosure gathering bot that goes and does what usually takes weeks for a human being and then weeks for my office to collate and index and everything else in the space of about 15 minutes, and it has changed our life. So we've been giving our clients two options. You can gather your information yourself and send it through to us, or we can connect you with this tool and it will do it for you. And you can see in this particular example, these prices change for every client. So it depends on the complexity of what's going on for them. You can see that the price that we proposed if this poor lady Sarah was going to do it herself versus the price, sorry, I just lost my clicker, price if she used our tool. So we were immediately building in an incentive. We see a lot of benefit in this tool. It saves incredible efforts at our end, organises things and analyses information, and we want to encourage people to use it. But I'm also not someone that would say to someone, you must do this. So we wanted to demonstrate, look, there are advantages if you use this tool, and here's an immediate financial advantage to you in doing so. One of the questions I often get asked as family lawyers, yeah, but disclosure, Clarissa, it can go on for months and months and months. So you can see that what we've done here is built in a when completed within 8 weeks of engagement. And if this stage is not completed within 8 weeks of an engagement, you can see the note that we would then be, in essence, issuing a variation, because we do find in family law, there are some lawyers that just love the disclosure process and it can go on forever. So we've also learned by using this automated tool, we can control by and large at our end, our own clients' efficiencies around these things. So we can really do it very quickly and efficiently and ensure we have the majority of the information quickly. And we're not left in that, can you please get this tax return? Can you please get this bank statement? So giving people choice, and you'd be shocked to know, most people choose option 2, thanks, but just showing them that there's 2 different ways that they can do that. Then once we've gathered that information, so I think this example I'm showing you is a financial case only. So we've gathered some financial information, and now what we're going to be doing is starting to build proposals. In this particular example, I haven't built in a scenario where I'm missing a whole lot of information from the other people and I need that before I could do this. So if that was the case, there'd be a separate stage for this. But in this scenario, we've assumed that through our own information gathering phase with our own client, we're going to be able to get enough of the data to take us to a place where we can make a proposal. And this is a really important step, I find, in family law matters. So for this particular client, we've set out a fee for making a proposal. And you can see there all of the pieces that are involved in that. And making a proposal, I think sometimes in the mind of a client, it's just a letter. It never is. It's a conversation with them. It's advice to them about the likely range of outcomes. It's a discussion around the different types of proposals that they might want to make. And often there's some back and forth around that. We prepare a PowerPoint presentation for them that shows them, here's the legal position, here are some scenarios, here are some options. There's a whole lot of work that can go into making a proposal. And you can see again, we've got a please note. There'll be a repeat of this for each proposal that you wish to make. So again, sometimes you make a proposal, then you receive a response and you make another one. And the way that we've found lately, and this may change again in 6 months, is working for us is to say proposal, and you do another one, another cost. And you've got a choice. Do I do another one or do I just do one? This then is saying, okay, if we can't resolve through that proposal exchange process, we could now move to mediation. And so you'll see again that we've broken down the mediation into steps. We were finding that we were arranging mediations and that was taking forever because there was dispute over panels and coordinating diaries and all sorts of things, and it was just a mess. So that's a standalone step. So that even if that doesn't happen, we've got a fee for that piece of wasting time before we might move on to litigation because people couldn't even agree on a mediator. Preparing for mediation. So again, many of you would be involved in this in your work, and you again need to think about what's the complexity of this, what's involved in this preparation piece, and change your price accordingly. Attendance at mediation, what's involved in that. And then off the back of that, a settlement meeting is another option that we use heavily up here. So they may not do a mediation, they might do a roundtable conference instead. So part 3, mediation option, part 4, settlement meeting option, talking them through here, the steps. So they're a bit of an either or for me. This is that choice piece again. And then finally, at the end, the settlement documents. And so pricing out for people what's going to be involved in your settlement documents. And again, the price for each one of these would change dependent upon complexity. If you get to the end and it turns out that I wasn't drafting the settlement documents and I felt that the fees that I'd set out here were unnecessarily high, given that the work that was now involved was less, I've never met a client that's going to complain when I say that original quote I gave you, I'm actually going to be able to give you a lesser one now because the work involved is less. So again, you can always scope down. It's much harder to scope up. Common extra steps is a piece that we've added in lately, and this is a bit like a menu because we just found there were just these things that kept popping up. They're smaller things, but they were costing us money and we didn't have them in our scope. So now they've just become an itemized page of different things that pop up, and we keep adding to this depending what's going on and depending on the type of matter. And then this is our billing timeframes page. So for each of those steps in that project plan, so step 1 from memory was our gathering of information stage. If they choose option 1, you can see there how we've got billing timeframes that are connected to tasks being completed. And we connect the billing timeframes to tasks that are within our control. Never connect a billing timeframe to when we receive a response from the other person, because you may never receive the response from the other person, and then you can't bill for perhaps the work that you've done in sending the documents to the other person or whatever it might be. So all of our billing timeframes are connected to steps that are within our control. And it has worked really well. And breaking it down, so we wouldn't ask this particular client for the $20,000 or whatever that whole fee proposal might look like in trust. We ask them for step 1 and step 2. And then from step 2, when we've sent that proposal, we're at a place where we can go, okay, this is now the way forward, or this is now the way forward, or this is now the way forward. So that real choose your own adventure style of process is what we're using at the moment. So that's me talking super fast to try and fit in the 9 a.m. time frame at the end of our fixed fee example there, signing page. That still does go, sadly, with a somewhat Word Times New Roman cost agreement. I don't use Times New Roman, but it is still a black and white document. That's my next document to try and pretty up and make more user friendly. But that is how we do our fixed fee packages to people, or one example anyway. There are many of those, obviously, depending on what work people are doing. Our fixed pricing packs are for sale, so you can buy packs of examples. Of course, I am a family lawyer, so they will be family law examples, but in my view, they are applicable everywhere. They just help to give you some sense of the communications that we're using, the types of documents that we're sending, all of those sorts of things, and a bit more information about how to implement this in your firm. But if you really want to implement in your firm, I am going to say in a very selfish way that the best way to do that, or one of the best ways to do that, is to get some help. There are many great consultants in this space. One of them, as I said, John Chisholm, is on the call, an amazing person that can come into your firm and help you do this. I can't because I run a firm, but what I do instead is offer courses online. I have one starting on Wednesday. It's a 4-week online course that will help you to implement this in your practice. The time commitment from you in terms of physical attendance is 1 hour each Wednesday morning between 8 and 9, very similar to today. And then there's a series of workbooks and exercises that we would encourage you to do. If you are going to do a fixed pricing workshop, I would encourage you to bring a friend. What I mean by that is someone in your firm that might assist you in implementing, because you really need champions for these sorts of projects. If you're making this sort of structural change in an organization, it has to be championed from different places or it becomes really, really hard. So we will send you some more information about all of those things. And please do reach out and ask any questions of me if you ever need to. But thank you so much for joining me bright and early on your Monday morning. I hope you're off to enjoy a nice week, even though everything just still feels so very, very strange. I am happy to stay on and answer any questions that people have from my blah information at you this morning. But otherwise, as I said, I wish you all the best. Have a wonderful week. Thank you for sticking with me for the hour. And I do hope that was helpful to you as you begin this journey into something that is really quite different, but it's very exciting. It's very interesting. There are more good things than bad things that will come from fixed and value pricing. And if you're interested in building a client-centric practice, which I think we should all be right now, it is absolutely the way of the world, then this really sits at the heart of you being able to do this. This will free you up so that you can start to think about products. And that's a topic for another day, but it's one of my favorite topics. How do I build things that make money, that don't involve me sitting here at my desk doing stuff all the time? How do I do that? Well, the key to doing that is to not have time as the sort of metric of success. The key to doing that is losing all of that, moving to this value mindset, and then thinking about, wow, what can we build here that people might be able to download on a Sunday, and I can be out enjoying the sunshine and making money as a result. All right. Thank you so much, team. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, John. You're very kind. Very good to sit and listen to me about a space that you know far more than me about. Thank you, Sarah. Have a wonderful day, guys, and I will see you all soon.